Hi, this is Bruce Rawles. I'm speaking again with Susan Dugan, and as always, we're going to be talking about A Course in Miracles. Sometimes we might have to talk about something other than that, but that's usually what we talk about here.
Movies or books or
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
really. Anyway,
Cooking.
thank you, Susan, as always, for the
Yeah.
conversations that I find really helpful and
Oh,
enjoyable.
thank you.
And Susan suggested today that we talk about Workbook Lesson 153, which is "In my defenselessness, my safety lies." Almost a tongue twister there, huh?
Yes.
So yeah, this is a really excellent lesson because it really ties into how much we want to defend as egos our status and our position and our judgments, and the list goes on, and we could probably spend many hours talking about this, but perhaps it would be best to just lay a little groundwork first. And anything that you want to start out with? Any announcements first, Susan, or anything?
Well,
Opening remarks?
I mean, maybe we could read what we wrote about it,
Yeah.
and as a way of introducing the topic. I mean, the
Perfect.
reason that it wasn't necessarily this lesson, although I only chose it because it speaks directly to that topic.
Mm-hmm.
But we're in a heightened period of threat, it seems like, all the time in our world. And, we're certainly hearing about more threats all the time. And it does seem, as if we're kind of under fire all the time by attacks from,
Mm-hmm.
that seem to be coming at us. And so I think that really the only piece that we can find in that is to really go to look at it as course students from the metaphysics of the course. And so we can introduce the subject maybe by reading what we had to say, and then maybe we could jump into, we did
Sure.
get a couple of questions that we're going to take first. So
Okay. Would you like to read that, or would you like me to?
why don't you want to read the first paragraph of that, and I'll read the second?
Sure. Um, I'll just read from my blog post here. It says,
Okay.
in the next upcoming course conversation with Susan and Dugan and Bruce Rawls, we will look at Workbook Lesson 153, "In my defenselessness, my safety lies," which tells us the world provides no safety. It is rooted in attack, and all its, quote, "gifts," unquote, of seeming safety are illusory deceptions. Believing our secret wish to experience the thought of separation as a real attack on God, we believe we deserve punishment for our, quote, "sin," unquote. Project that guilt on the world and each other and experience ourselves as constantly vulnerable. We spend our days fielding seeming incoming attacks, in quotes, while trying to prove we really exist apart from God, but it's not our fault. It's those attackers, completely unaware we're attacking too. Well, there's a lot just right in that opening paragraph, isn't there?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not aware that it's our secret wish to experience the thought of separation that really causes us to make the guilt real and then become defensive about everything.
Mm-hmm.
We're really projecting that out and experiencing it as an incoming attack, as it says at the end. And
Yes.
we're not aware that this is something that we're generating at the level of the mind. It has nothing to do with the illusory world that we've created, that we think is somehow going to provide refuge from this angry God that is in hot pursuit of us for having left home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to read the rest of the, if that's okay.
Sure, please do.
Our vulnerability as bodies identified with the personal self within the ego thought system of one or the other seems completely justified based on the constant challenges and threats that seem to arise out of nowhere beyond our control. But we are not powerless victims of the world we experience. When we're willing to question the cause of our reactivity to threats that seem to be constantly aimed in our direction and look at them instead with our loving inner teacher who holds the memory of our true innocence and invulnerability as one child of God outside the dream, we can drop our defenses and connect with our shared interest of finding our way home to the one love we never really loved. So, we can't, as bodies, as personal selves identified with the body, which we all are,
Mm-hmm.
really understand what defensiveness I'm sorry, defenseless. We know defensiveness very well, but what defenselessness really means, because we
Right.
will twist that meaning as well. But but we can learn that we really have nothing to fear by connecting with the teacher of invulnerability, of defenselessness, Jesus, Holy Spirit in our mind. And we can learn, by the practice of forgiveness, which keeps questioning the cause of the seeming attack, to align and experience the true defenselessness, of our true nature, and also uh, if we can align and become aware of the deep need that we all have to find our way back to that awareness that we really, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to
Yeah.
defend against. There's no guilt with which we're competing. There's only our one innocence.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. One of the recent workbook lessons for those doing it in a sequential calendric fashion is there's nothing to fear, and that one is
right,
a pretty short, easy one to remember, but because
hard to believe though.
hard to believe, right? Because we're, as you
Yeah,
point out, yeah, we're so identified with these silly, seemingly separate selves that have bodies and are vulnerable and need defense
exactly.
apparently, and then today's workbook lesson, uh, which says I'm sustained by the love of God, and yet it immediately launches into, we think that we need everything from pills to protective clothing to the right friends to
Right.
any number of things.
Hazmat suits. Right.
Yeah, really. I mean,
Yeah.
the list is endless, seemingly endless, of all the stuff that we think we need to do,
Helmets. Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
do and
Yeah.
and and have and rearrange, and it's just like it's this constant barrage of stuff. So the only thing that really stops it is that awareness that says something has to click, like it did for Helen and Bill. It's like there must be a better way, and when we reach those points in our mind where we stop and question the veracity of the propaganda that the ego mind dishes out 24/7, and just say, wait a minute, there must be a better way than
Right.
than thinking that the world is this horrible, hostile place. And the beauty of it is Holy Spirit will take everything, literally everything, and transform it from a reinforcement of a prison mindset to a classroom one, and
Right. To a learning
a
opportunity.
learning
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really the only, the sane curriculum of the
Hmm.
course is just to change the purpose of our
Yeah.
lives, of our
Yeah.
dream, of our relationships, our experience in the world. And that's something that we can't remind ourselves of often enough,
Uh-huh.
because it's so easy to get swept again. The whole point of the ego thought system is to keep us mindlessly monitoring the threat level and responding to it, right? And so that can keep us completely mindless, and completely busy, forgetting that we even have a mind, if we're not really vigilant, and practicing, reminding ourselves all the time of our purpose and our teacher and our practice, and really questioning, paying close attention to how we're feeling in every moment, and questioning the cause of those reactions.
Exactly.
And those reactions that we have that are so defensive, that seem to be that, I have to somehow protect my body. I have to somehow protect myself emotionally. I have to protect my family. My dog is snoring like crazy on the floor over here, and the louder I get, the louder she gets. So there you have it. We like to talk over each other, but it is that defensiveness that we have to be sort of aware, alert to
Uh-huh.
within ourselves, because that's a sure sign that we've chosen our ego,
Exactly.
and we need help. We've chosen the wrong teacher.
Yeah. There's a telltale phrase in the course that always strikes me whenever I read it, is, that it's, I'm going to paraphrase it as usual, but you know that things are amiss when you're trusting in your own strength, because we immediately,
Right.
we're just not at peace. We just don't feel right when we're relying on our own isolated judgment. I mean, the metaphor that comes to mind that I was just sharing a few minutes ago with some other folks, was it's almost like we're in this little flatland universe, and because we've limited our understanding and narrowed our focus down to this little tiny Whoville world of 3 dimensions and space and time and individuality, which is, even science, let alone metaphysics, tells us is an illusory misunderstanding. It's kind of like in flatland. If you poke a pencil through a flatland world, all the little flatland 2-dimensional creatures are going to fantasize, and think that, oh, I'm hallucinating now. Here's this black dot when the pencil head goes through, and then I've expanded to this brown circle now that the wood part comes through for the pencil, and then now it's a yellow hexagon, and then pretty soon it turns into a green circle when the little metal band holding the eraser, goes through the paper, and then this pink circle that shrinks a little bit and is kind of spongy, and when they push on it, and then it disappears, But
Right.
what a great hallucination, from a 3-dimensional perspective that makes perfect sense. But we're here in this. We've intentionally shut ourselves off from knowledge, and made up a substitute reality that we think of as space-time, and so, we have every reason to be fearful and feel
Right.
vulnerable and
Right.
think we need defenses because our identification is misplaced.
Right. Really, as bodies, as personal selves, we have no strength. We have
Yeah,
no, we really are vulnerable all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
And we're not aware that we set it up that way.
exactly.
That we really, that's part of the plan, that means that I am a innocent victim of the world I see. And I'm powerless to, why can't I ever catch a break, well, maybe we should we got a couple of really great questions
Yeah, yeah,
about this subject that I think would be great to address.
yeah.
And
How about if I read the question and
yeah,
you can
yep.
give your
Like,
initial thoughts, and
there's
we
a
can.
couple of questions,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
comments from this person. So,
Uh-huh.
but why don't you go start with that? Yeah.
Sure, sure. I'll read the first part. My
Okay.
question about defenselessness has to do with who is the one defending, or who is defenselessness for? Is defenselessness for the ego or for the self? It must be for the ego, but why would the ego seek to be defenseless? Wouldn't defenselessness destroy the ego? Great question.
Right. It is a great question.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not a simple question because, again, we have a split mind. So there's different ways that we would be looking at defenselessness and defensiveness, just like everything else, depending on, which part of the mind we're choosing. But the first question, my question about, who is the one defending? Well, it's really always the decision-making mind that's deciding which teacher that we want to align ourselves with, to experience with. And so, the ego, if we're choosing the ego, we always feel that we need to defend ourselves.
Mhm.
And so there is no true defenselessness within the ego thought system,
Exactly.
period.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah.
There could be the appearance of defenselessness, which would be another form of, similar, you could call it, the workbook talks about, or the Song of Prayer pamphlet talks about forgiveness to destroy, in
Mm-hmm.
which you can think of it as kindness to destroy is another way of putting it, but, in which we are, um, which is the world's forgiveness, where we're trying to portray ourselves as saying, I forgive you for what you really did to me, but really that's a false kind of forgiveness, because it never really lets the other person off the hook, and all it does is reinforce the inequality in the relationship, and the assertion that one person is more guilty than the other.
Right.
And so I would say that defenselessness has the same, if the ego is trying to to portray itself as being defenseless, then that's a form of forgiveness to destroy. That's a
Yeah.
way of saying,
Yeah.
that because I'm the more evolved person here, the more innocent person here, I'm going to, let you treat me like this,
Yeah.
but forgive you, right?
Uh-huh.
or put up with it so that I can play the, think of the martyrs in Christianity, right? Or in any religious system,
Mhm.
where there's a deep incentive to portray ourselves as victimized, and we and not fighting back. That would be a form of saying of really condemning the other person. I mean, it's defenselessness clothed in defensiveness.
Exactly,
Right. Does
exactly.
that make sense?
It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, as you point out, that it's really that decision-making switch that is constantly choosing between one of two options,
Yes.
either the ego's insanity of thinking I have a separate self that needs defending from everything else in the universe, including my own body, let alone all the other bodies and all the other
Right.
things that could be coming at me from various parts of the universe. Or usually it's more local stuff, but it can be everything from viruses to malware on our computer to asteroids to
Right.
cars on the freeway that aren't paying attention to the whole gamut of stuff, or an insult that is hurled at us through an email or social media, or a reporter on
Or
television.
right to our face.
Oh, right to our face. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, all the direct and indirect
Less and less,
assaults.
that's
Yeah,
true, but yeah.
yeah, exactly. But the ego has no shortage of options for making up
Right.
imaginary foes, whether or not they're identified as such. But
Exactly.
and the word innocence is also to me become sort of a trigger word. Was in the sense that when I think in terms of innocence, the only innocence that's really valid, which ties into true invulnerability and true defenselessness, is the innocence that's shared by everyone. And I
That's
think
right.
Ken Wapnick, in his brilliant work, points that out over and over again in a lot of different ways, is that if innocence has to do with anything at anyone else's expense, or like you were just sharing, or if it's relative innocence, it's like
Right.
that doesn't fly in truth, because
No,
in
it
truth
doesn't.
there's just one innocent being, and tag, we're all it.
Right.
And the forgiveness to destroy would be really basically denying that in one way or another, and establishing a crime of one sort or another that requires some parties to be guilty and some to be innocent, and
That's
then
right. Yep.
then then the oneness is shattered. So
Right.
yeah, that's
And
that's
it,
usually a
and
tip off, isn't it?
yes, and I mean, the person is saying, wouldn't defenselessness destroy the ego? Well, if it was true defenselessness, it's coming from the right mind, and at least in that moment, the ego is not in the equation,
Right,
and
right,
because
right,
we are at that point outside of the dream,
right.
of time and space, and aligned with at least the reflection, the memory of that one innocent child of God that we all are. But
Exactly.
that doesn't, I mean, only at the very end, the top of the ladder, the end of the dream, do we really accept the true defenselessness for good, and not, and we don't go back and forth, right?
Right.
Just like,
Exactly.
so there's no need for defenselessness once this dream is over and we awaken into our innocence.
Exactly.
Right
And it's
now we need the word defenselessness because it's the opposite of defensiveness, which doesn't exist in heaven,
Yeah,
right? Does that
exactly.
make sense?
It
Yeah.
makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. And what it does also is kind of that last little question of wouldn't defenselessness destroy the ego, kind of ties into what you're just saying, in that at the top of the ladder, which we don't have to really worry about because we got our hands full just dealing with where we're at,
The
which
first
for most of
rung.
us
Yeah.
is that first rung of just thinking that we're the victim or the martyr,
Right.
or somehow at the mercy of the world, let alone our own mind, if we take it inside. But eventually, we'll get to the point where we recognize that ego that we identified with so heavily was just all made up. So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
there's really nothing to destroy or to defend, in truth, because our real identity, which is completely innocent and includes everyone, doesn't perfect oneness doesn't need any defenses, because there's nothing outside of perfect oneness. But that's something it seems like just a nice theory, and so that's why we really need the practical, pragmatic, everyday forgiveness classroom of looking at the things that
Right.
upset us in order to get back to the mind and use those opportunities to just every chance we get say, oh, that's my projection, oh, that's my projection.
Right.
And then when we do that, we go from that outer shield of oblivion to the inner shield, which is where the ego gets really nervous. But that's where the work comes in, where the Holy Spirit really amps up the juice, says, okay, let's look at this together. This defensiveness that you think is going to help you, if we look at it together, we can see that it's unfounded.
Right.
And that unfounded guilt can be vaporized just by looking at it with the Holy Spirit and seeing, my real eternal being has never ever been assaulted by anything, and nor
Right.
could it be, nor could that be true for anyone else. And so that being the case, it kind of, that great equalizer says, I can see peace instead of this. And
Right.
we slowly but surely abandon those substitute ideas and return to the real cause in the mind, which is that we never left heaven. We never left that perfect oneness,
Right.
and we can
Right. And we
keep
have
there.
that we can certainly have that momentary shift that we
Yeah,
really, as an experience, where
exactly.
our defensiveness gives way to defenselessness. We have that sigh of relief that I was wrong. This isn't necessary. I don't
Mm,
have to do this in this relationship. Or, I mean,
exactly.
it isn't really a heady experience. It's more of a just, wow, okay,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
whoa, that's gone. That wasn't real. That was something, that was a guilt that I don't need to deal with. It's not in them, it's not in me. We have that experience of that.
Yeah.
And that's, along the way, what gives us the contrast of those two states of being. And we recognize more and more that we want defenselessness, and that defensiveness is making us miserable and has no cause. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's exhausting.
Yeah, and I think one way to get out of the exhaustion mode is to just notice how exhausting the ego's propaganda and listening to it
For
has
itself.
made
Yeah.
us. And I was listening again to Ken's comments on lesson 182 earlier today, and one of the things that keeps striking me every time I hear that is like the point of of A Course in Miracles curriculum is not to make us miserable. It's to point out how miserable we've made
You already
ourselves
are.
by constantly needing to defend the
Right.
substitution we thought we pulled off for perfect oneness, and
Right.
it didn't happen. There's no
Right.
foundation there. But we have to look at the individual specifics in order to get back to the mind and
Right.
use
Which
every.
is my relationship with whoever or whatever seems to be troubling me at the moment.
Exactly,
That's our
exactly.
curriculum. So
Yeah.
I'm going to read the next part of this
Okay.
question. In my own life, when I try to practice defenselessness, an enormous amount of fear rises up in me. I feel so vulnerable, naked, and unsheltered. I know there has to be something that comes prior to defenselessness, and that is trust. I don't think I can be defenseless without trust. Is that true? So, I mean, again, two answers, right? I mean, there's, on the surface, if the ego is asking that question, if we think, the ego's perspective on defenselessness would be, how can I be defenseless when I can't trust you,
Hmm.
right? I don't know that you're not going to attack me again. So I have to keep my guard up all the time,
Right.
right?
Right.
So and from the course's perspective, we're not asked to trust our brothers' bodies. They're not very trustworthy.
No.
Neither is
No.
mine, right? As a personal self, we're
Right.
not.
Right.
We're,
Right.
we're
No.
not trustworthy.
No.
People
No.
turn on
No.
you like that,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But I think the deeper question in this is the trust of, which teacher can I trust? Which, this is about the development of trust in a new teacher that we're just becoming acquainted with, which the Course uses the symbol of Jesus, Holy Spirit. But it's really that part of that memory of wholeness and invulnerability in our mind that is always there for us, and is never, holds the awareness of our all-inclusive innocence that's never been compromised in any way by our mad dreams of guilt.
Hmm.
So if we can, this again, it's that practice of forgiveness, that practice of catching ourselves, or catching our defensiveness, and asking, questioning the cause that we're attributing it to, and raising that to the doubt of the part of our mind that is defenseless, looking at it in that light, that that we begin to have that experience of what defenselessness means, and that it includes everybody. It includes, there's no victims and no victimizers in this. We're all suffering from the same, different forms of the same psychosis, that we're separate from God and we need to defend ourselves. We're guilty as a result. We've sinned against God, we separated, and now we're guilty, and now we fear punishment, and we have to constantly be in competition for this lesser guilt with each other. And the only way out of that is to begin to develop an experience of this other part, this other teacher, and have that contrast again, that we begin to develop trust in the release and relief that our true defenselessness, through that teacher, allows us to experience, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, you said something a few moments ago that triggered another thing. It was kind of like, the battles, and I was thinking, well, the ego is always in a state of battle, even though at times on the surface there may appear to be a ceasefire, so to speak. Um,
right,
and I think that's part of the ego strategy is if we saw how horrific the ego's thought system was, in a completely lucid moment, we'd be out of there in a New York minute, as the saying
right,
goes.
right,
But because there seems to be an occasional payoff or an occasional nice thing in the dream,
right.
whatever that might be, there seems to be like a little ceasefire, now and then, just enough to keep us thinking, well,
Give us
maybe there's,
hope, right?
yeah, there's some
Keeping you
hope here that,
find and never finding. Yeah,
exactly, there's enough of a, well, now and then it seems to work, kind of thing. Well, in a sense, the only thing that really has ever worked is our choice of teachers,
right,
where the ego, the last thing the ego wants us to do is to admit to ourselves that those moments of peace have really come about by choosing a different teacher. And in those moments, the ego has been
right.
in suspended animation, if you will, and frozen. And then we go back to it because we thought, well, I didn't make up this other teacher, but I made up the ego. And so I kind of like that, because that's a me that I can, point to as a unique thing, and that's my thing. I did it my
Mm-hmm.
way. But then we're back on the battleground again. So
Right.
I think it takes a lot of gentle, patient vigilance to notice that between the battles and the ceasefires, anytime we've got the switch in the ego position, we're never really at peace.
No, we're not, because we're
Things
waiting for the next threat, right?
exactly, the next
Yeah.
shoe to drop, or the
Yep.
next sword to fall, or whatever. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And I think that the practice of this course, the practice of forgiveness, which really begins for us as students with the workbook, that's our introduction to
Mm-hmm.
what this might mean to practice in your life. Um, the that in itself makes us so much more aware of how it's not working.
Exactly.
I mean, we do become much more, we've been very deeply unconscious about our choice for the ego and about our reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we're really studying this, and we're listening, beginning to open to what Jesus, Holy Spirit is saying, and to pay attention to it, which
Mm-hmm.
he's always asking us to do. And then to question the cause, we see how incredibly reactive we are all the time. And it really does. I mean, it begins to be pretty miserable.
Right. Right.
I mean, we can't really get rid of it as the way we had. We've introduced doubt into our thought system, and the doubt is kind of there at all. I mean, I find that it's there at all times. So
Yeah.
even though we used to derive some satisfaction out of being right, or being feeling that we are the greater victim here, um, that's like not really there so much anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
the experience of the misery is heightened, and we have that contrast that we can work with. Yeah.
As you're saying that, I was thinking, what I find really helpful, and I'm really glad you brought this up, because the need for defenses, I think, is closely related to that experience of noticing how crazy things have gotten.
Right.
And like you say, it does seem as you practice the course that things may seem to get worse
Hmm.
before they get better.
Yes.
And I think that there's a parallel in the modern world in terms of the sheer amount of media. When we compare what we have available to with our technology that our grandparents didn't have, for
Right.
example, I mean, it seems like we're just inundated with so many things that are just uncountable, catastrophic, calamitous stuff, that it just seems like the world is so much worse. um,
Right.
but in a sense, it's always it was the best of times and the worst of times. It's only because we've become more aware of it.
Yes.
We've become more vigilant and we've actually improved the mindfulness and the lucidity with which we observe our everyday stuff after
Right.
doing the workbook and noticing the contrast between, like, those early workbook
Right.
lessons suggest of, you know, my mind is basically just giving me constantly a feedback loop of what I've chosen. And it's really the only important question is which of those two
Right.
teachers
Right.
am I choosing to ever
And
work
what are
with?
we going to do with it now? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it's never really helpful to question why I'm, the certain teachings have you sort of question, well, why is this in my dream, especially new age sort of things.
Hmm, hmm.
What did I do to create this, or I mean, and that from the course's perspective, that's not a helpful question.
Right, right,
The
right, right.
only important thing is, because everybody's um, in experiencing some form of a scenario of what separation means, and it all has bad stuff in it. you know
Yeah.
so there's, again, and there's no hierarchy of illusions.
Hmm,
So
hmm.
really the only important question, and the way that we know whether we're projecting or not, whether we've chosen the ego or not, is what do I do with it now? Which
Hmm.
teacher am I going to, what purpose am I going to give it now? As we were saying earlier, am I going to look at this as an opportunity, a learning opportunity, in which I can allow Jesus, Holy Spirit, to help me let go of more guilt
Yeah.
that I didn't even know was there, because the ego, as Ken used to say, hides in concealment. So we're raising this from the from the deeply rooted, you know, vaults of our of that we've buried in the mind, and have never wanted to look at. And so gradually we're beginning to see what's in our own Pandora's box of, as Ken used to call it, the grab bag of guilt. Right?
Hmm,
Everybody has
hmm.
their own horrors in there, and so as they sort of rise to the surface, we get a chance to look at them. But it's also a huge opportunity for us to let go of more guilt.
Exactly.
And um, but I think that, getting to that idea of back to that idea of trust, the development of trust is through the practice of forgiveness,
Hmm.
in which we are gradually learning to withdraw trust in the ego thought system by beginning to see it for what it is, and to see that, to own and take responsibility for our choice to support it.
Hmm.
And then to really be more and more willing to admit that we don't know what's in our best interest, and that we really, I mean, we were talking in my class last night a little bit about defenselessness, and here in Denver. And I we were making the point that we have to always, again and again, return to that humility of opening to Jesus, Holy Spirit, and saying, I don't know what defenselessness means. As Susan, I can't understand that.
Hmm.
So please help me with that. I don't know. I mean, I don't even, half the time I'm learning, I'm getting better at identifying when I'm defensive,
Hmm.
but it still blindsides me. I still find
Oh yeah,
myself being
sure.
defensive first and having to sort of back out of it. You
Right,
know what I
right,
mean?
right, right. Oh, completely.
So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. And I think being gentle with ourselves when we catch uh, our mind going into that ego place.
we're already
Um,
there, right?
yeah, it's like, okay, so I went down that crazy road again and
Yeah,
back
I went
into,
crazy again. Yeah.
yeah, that way lies madness, and I went that way.
I love that
Evidently,
path.
because I'm not at peace, right? Evidently. So when we catch ourselves, I think that's the grace that happens with
Yeah.
practice, and by consistently trusting, development of trust in the Holy Spirit's guidance. It's just like you say, I don't know. I'm not going to figure this out myself. I need that inner kindness teacher, that guidance to point it out to me when I'm not at peace, and to not make a big deal out of it and just say, oh yeah, yeah, you could have chosen peace instead of this, and you still can. Every
Right.
moment, I still can
Right.
choose the teacher of peace,
That's right. Yeah.
and just that recognition, I think, it eases our burden a bit, and then that reinforces the value of the trust,
Right.
and letting go of an identity that doesn't work for us, and allowing the shared identity to be replaced, where we say, oh well, I would. And oftentimes this has to do with relationships, because we find ourselves questioning, or battling, um, either people physically, or a lot more often, as we were talking about, it's really psychologically, the different perspectives or beliefs or whatever. And it's a mental war that's going on in each person's
All the time.
mind,
Yep.
that's needless. And we all have a teacher that says, you really don't need to do that. It's it's not
Right.
necessary for you to sabotage your own peace by constantly picking up that sword and then asking, how did this get in my hand again?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we can, we're far enough along now, a lot of us that have been practicing this, that, we can challenge it.
Yeah.
I mean, that we don't have to, we're not, we don't have to just blindly follow the ego
Right.
thoughts. And the
Exactly.
ego,
Exactly.
we can say, I mean, we recognize them at this point, and we can say, wait a minute. I mean, I'm not continuing with this. We don't have to shout down the ego, which is never, you don't want to be in war with yourself. But you can
Right.
also kind of say, I don't think that you're my friend,
Uh-huh.
And but I mean, I do love this question that was posed about,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, that I'm going to repeat that. I know there has to be something that comes prior to defenselessness, and that is trust.
Yes.
I don't think I can be defenseless without trust. Is that true? And no, I mean, it is true that you have to have trust in something that is not of this world, and something that is not of my personal self, that's
Right.
beyond my understanding as a person, as a personal identity, that something that is common within us all,
Mm-hmm.
that knows what defenselessness really means.
Yeah.
And each time we make a decision to um, to realign ourselves with that, to recognize our defensiveness, and then switch and say, wait, I don't want that anymore. Help me to see what I'd like to see this differently. I'd like to see peace instead of this. Then we're through that process of turning to our teacher that we really want to learn from. We're nourishing that relationship and that trust in our true self ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
and we're withdrawing the guilt that keeps the ego thought system going, without really doing anything except those little, the withdrawing, the undoing is done for us just by taking those two steps.
Yes. Yeah.
And we may not have an immediate experience of a shift, but at some point we will have a shift, and the course promises us that. And I think if you've been working with this for a while, you know that that's true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That,
And
yeah,
the momentary things that do happen, enough as we're practicing forgiveness, are just a little bit of respite, a little bit of peace, just a little bit of a true ceasefire, not just the the surface stuff, but we
right,
actually experience moments of peace, and I
yeah,
think that continues to build until we realize, I've never ever really have had any kind of peace following the ego's battle cries,
right,
and its call for
yeah,
countless forms of defense.
right.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, we know it's just a quick descent into madness, because,
Hmm.
once you see that threat level and you identify with it, it's everywhere. I mean, as you were saying, I mean, we have all these ways of notifying us about, all of what's happening all over the world at any given moment, let alone our personal lives, and the
Yeah.
texts that
Yeah.
we're receiving, and the emails, and all of that. So, yeah, I mean, really, it's really trying to catch ourselves as quickly as we possibly can before we just go right down the rabbit hole again, right?
Exactly.
Um,
But not to panic when we don't,
right.
and use that as a classroom. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked to share some things in a meeting, and I had my calendar wires crossed, and I realized I was totally unprepared, and I realized, well, that became my forgiveness classroom.
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know so no matter what happens, it's just like, oh, okay, I get to use everything that happens
Yep.
when I'm alert to it as an opportunity to let myself off the hook and let
Right.
everyone else off the hook. um,
Right.
and that's always simultaneous, because minds are joined, and if I drop my defenses, then it helps everyone around me drop theirs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, that's a wonderful thing with the course is that, you can go through things that you never thought you'd be able to go through, with if we're identified with the strength in us,
Mm-hmm.
the strength in our mind. It's not in my brain, but,
Yeah.
and be very present. And, that's it may not be what your personal self liked or would have chosen or understands why it is experiencing, but nonetheless, I mean, we have that a piece that really is beyond all understanding available to us in any moment. And so why don't we use it more, right?
Good question. Good question.
So we have a lot of fear. Yes, there is fear. The fear that this person talks about is very formidable too, and we're all, I think
Yeah.
everybody can relate to that.
Oh, yeah.
In my own, I mean, yes, when we are defenseless, an enormous amount of fear can come up for us, and very often following any decision, any choice for Jesus, Holy Spirit to be truly defenseless, we have a real backlash. The ego becomes retaliative again, and we can be in a lot of fear, we can be in a lot of anger, we can be suddenly feeling very attacked or attacking again.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of the journey, and as you were saying, try not to take it too seriously, really.
Yeah.
Try to just just get right back, and as consistently as you can, go back to practicing what Jesus is recommending,
Mm-hmm.
and forgive yourself when you go down the rabbit hole again, right?
Right. Right.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
that getting back up again, I think, with practice, we get back up on the horse or the bicycle or
Yeah.
the whatever it is that we're we're bucked off of, and by realizing that it was our own, misunderstanding, and our own, lack of practice and experience
Right.
that really was the cause of every
Right.
mishap, um, and it's really just letting go of a teacher that doesn't work, and
Right.
that then it constantly keeps us in fear by, essentially creating a nuclear arsenal in our mind, where where we really could be, instead of manufacturing more swords, we could be making plowshares and growing flowers. And
Right. And I mean, that's what we're saying really when we're talking about, we don't have to, we can talk back to it.
Mhm.
It's really just a way of saying that we're not we're the decision-making mind. We're not the ego, we're
Mhm.
not this personal self. And we have a power that is way beyond this to choose again. And so, to act like, I mean, I think very often course students, including myself, will say, well, my ego won't shut up. And, well, but who's in charge?
Uh-huh. Where's the switch?
I'm not the ego,
Where's that little toggle switch in the mind going? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that when we've chosen the ego. It feels, we Ken used to say we become the ego,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
or in our experience. But
Right, right.
but we again, we've introduced doubt through our practice into the whole thought system. So the doubt should always be there,
Yeah.
that I have a different choice.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah, and actually, that the way you started the first part of our conversation, it's really two ways of looking at anything. So the
right,
ego's use of doubt is to doubt the Holy Spirit, which is to basically say, wait a minute, was I really peaceful? Of course, it's
right,
using every smoke screen and every subterfuge possible to try
right,
to obscure the truth. But the Holy Spirit's use of doubt is it's just this quiet, you know, um, calm use of doubt that says, maybe that ego thing that you've identified with, that's narrowed down to a little tiny, fragile, frail space-time creature that needs infinite defense because it's infinitely vulnerable, maybe that identity isn't in your best interest to identify with, and that you're really beyond space and time. And you might want to consider that more.
Right, right.
So that's
Yeah,
that's
I
the
mean, we've
that's the right use
studied
of
this.
doubt, perhaps. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, we've read and studied this big blue book for how long now? And, so you should have, the doubt should be pretty, pretty close to, the question and the answer lie side by side in all moments, right?
Exactly.
And we have the answer. The
Hmm.
answer doesn't scream at us. The answer just waits. Forgiveness is still and quietly does nothing. We were reading in the workbook the what is the miracle last night. So it looks on devastation and reminds I think it's that in that passage, reminds the mind that what it sees is false.
Uh-huh.
Just wait, and it's a passive in that sense, that it's just the truth waiting for us. But Jesus has presented it in so many different ways for us to understand in this book that we continue to study and discuss, and and we say we try to live, but so it's just a matter of really being as vigilant as we possibly can, recognizing that um, making this the most important thing, the sort of organizing principle of my life, is to which that helps me look at everything in my life and perform all the roles that, everything that I have to do is really a classroom for learning this. And if I give that meaning to my life, then my life has meaning. Right now, as an ego, it has no meaning whatsoever. It's
Hmm.
completely meaningless. As the early workbook lessons are really telling us, we miss it completely. Our first, I don't know how many times through the workbook,
Yeah.
but this is the great hope of A Course in Miracles.
It really is, and every time I pick up the book, and it's not like the book is anything like, it's not like a sacred object, is everyone from Judy Whitson to Ken Wapnick and so many others have pointed out,
Right.
it's not the form, it's the
No, it's
content of the
not.
mind. But I find that when I pick up the book, and just what it can be, today's workbook lesson, it can be
Mhm.
opening at random, it could be lesson 153, wherever. If I'm going into it with that mindset, it then becomes the mechanism by which I recognize that I've chosen a different teacher. And then the everything that's seems to be around me suddenly switches on to having a real meaning, which is the
Mhm.
meaning of, I can forgive myself for making up what seems to be a crazy world that I seem
Right.
to be trapped in. I seem to need all these defenses like crazy, and yet if I can just stop now and then and look at that whole attack defense cycle, and
Right.
just say, step out of that little, you know, crazy tiger chasing its tail loop in the mind, and just say, oh, I could see peace instead of this.
Right.
And that momentary pause is enough um, to do it. And for me, I find, and I imagine for people listening to this, you're probably drawn to this because of Course in Miracles speaks to you, and it's really the voice behind the words. It's as Ken Wapnick liked to say, the mellows, the music behind the notes that is
Right.
really drawing to us. Um, that awareness that we're wanting to bring back into mind, so that we can
Right. That we so experienced so much loss over believing that we
yeah,
can't find
yeah,
that again. And
yeah.
and and I think the other thing that is so incredibly helpful with this practice is to we learn through our relationship through the course, and so there really is that very huge relief and release when we have that sudden awareness as a result of having finally chosen against the ego, and which means we automatically turn to that, on some level experience the defenselessness of our right mind, that we there's that big sigh of relief that we're all the same.
Mhm.
All these big differences that I'm making in my life between groups and individuals, and my past and my future and my partners and, all of it. It's just a bunch of hooey,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It really means nothing, and everybody really is trying to find, course student and non-course student, everybody's trying to find their way home.
Mhm.
Everybody does find their way home.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, that's really the happy dream
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
when you see that we're the same, we're
Yeah.
the same. There are only calls for love. It's always my call for love, and it's always answered, and I can always answer it.
And sometimes it sounds like a little bit of a stretch, but I like to try to remind myself, as Ken points out, you can't really stray too far from the metaphysics of the Course.
Right.
And one of the ideas that I find helpful is that we're already home.
Right.
We're just dreaming of exile. We're just dreaming that somehow we pulled off this catastrophe at someone else's expense, but when we shift the blame to the projection game, and that's already over in truth.
Right.
But we're going through the motions of
We're defending the hell out of it,
yeah,
Yeah.
we are, but and we can slowly but surely
Right.
drop the defenses, lower the shields,
Right.
when we realize that this is just an incredibly elaborate movie with unimaginably technically sophisticated special effects that we call space-time and individuality, and all these bodies and planets and quarks to quasar stuff that seems to be so enthralling. It's just a friggin' movie that we've
Yeah.
identified with so
Yeah.
thoroughly that it doesn't really have to be that way. Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's a good point, that we have to go slow enough, as we don't want to throw ourselves back into fear. So it's not
Right.
helpful to try to skip steps, as Ken used to say. You want to,
Right.
whenever something, you need to stay present with this practice and paying attention to your reactions, and they will tell you which
Mhm.
teacher you've chosen. And we have to look at the specifics in our lives to let it go.
Yep.
And or to have it let go for us, to be willing to offer it to the part of our mind that knows what we're letting go of, the unreal quality of it. So we have to kind of take it step by step until all the guilt is gone, and we'll know when the guilt is gone because we won't be reacting anymore. We'll be kind to everyone at all times, and we'll have no judgments.
That
So
sounds pretty good.
yeah,
Where do
I
I
still
sign up
have
for
a
that?
ways to go, I think.
Yeah, we do.
Not sure about you, but I know I
Oh,
do.
no. I know that on a good day, I'm at the bottom rung, typically.
Right.
That's but that's okay, because that, I think that gives us a lot of room for growth, and to not, like you say, not get ahead of ourselves, and just be patient and gently vigilant, and
Right.
as gentle as we can with ourselves and everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, we just have such an enormous, we have everything to gain and really nothing to lose in this process.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
But I think we're going to stop right now because we've
I
been
was
going
thinking the
for
same thing. I think
quite a long time. And
yeah.
so I recommend, if anyone's interested, that they actually read lesson 153 in my Defenselessness, My Safety Lies. It's a wonderful lesson. And, but it really graphically depicts the world we've made up and how defensive and the attack defense cycle that we've been talking about, which the noticing of is what really helps us, is the invitation to the Holy Spirit. Noticing our choice for that within ourselves is how we begin to learn the meaning of defenselessness.
Yeah.
So,
I'm just going to read one short sentence, if
sure.
I may. This is just kind of right in the middle, jumped out at me. It really is how pragmatic this is. Defenses are the costliest of all the prices of which the ego would exact. So I mean, if you're looking at a bargain, the
Yeah.
ego is no bargain. There's no
Right.
value there.
Right.
In truth. Yeah.
Well, it cost us the awareness of everything,
Yeah.
to limit ourselves to bodies, which is
Mhm.
the defense that we're projecting, we're asserting to the world.
Right.
This is my fence against love.
We're defending nothing at the expense of
Yeah.
everything. That's
Very-
pretty silly. You think
Yeah,
about those terms.
exactly. So
Yeah.
stop it.
Well,
Stop it, Susan.
thank you, Susan. As
Thank
always,
you.
I always enjoy these conversations, and I'm
Me too.
reminded of myself how much more helpful it would be to practice just
Yeah.
up a notch a little bit more each time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So anything else you'd like to mention or announce? I know you have these wonderful classes on Tuesday evenings in the Denver area at the Rocky Mountain
Yeah.
Miracle Center.
Nothing special.
Yeah.
Just, I hope, yeah, I hope we can do more of this. And
Yeah. Yeah.
we're hoping to find some other ways of teaching online, and
Yeah.
hoping that some of that will come to us at some point.
Yeah. And I want to thank the person who wrote in the questions, and
Yes, yes.
we'll try to
That
do
was
more of
wonderful.
these. I think that was really helpful too.
They were very, very well thought,
Hmm.
just really helpful questions to anybody trying to practice this. So yes,
Hmm.
thank you so much.
And we're all learning together.
Exactly. Yeah. That helped us really target the whole talk. So I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yes. So you can find Susan and her work at foraysinforgiveness.com. And I will also post the video from this conversation on aciandblog.com. And until next time, thank you all, and look forward to the next conversation.